Okay, here we are again. Hello, my love. We meet again.
Hello, we meet again.
So today we're going to talk about projection.
And how it's very natural.
Yes, I know that's the point that, or one of the points that you and I really wanted to emphasize is, like many psychology terms that become kind of pop psychology, the term is used technically correctly, but kind of takes on sort of a flavor or connotation of wrongness or badness. In particular, in relationship, of course, which is what we're centered on with these chats. Yep. So people will say, well, you're just projecting, right? And that's supposed to mean you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, or you're not in a reality. You're not seeing things clearly, which is
Right.
probably accurate. However, it's a way for people to be defensive.
Right. And so there's a technical truth to that, but there's also an incorrect implication, which is that you shouldn't ever be projecting, or projecting is always a problem. And as you started out by saying, projection is natural. I think I would also say that projection is fundamental. This will make more sense, of course, when we get into the explanations, but by fundamental, I mean fundamental to our experience of the world. It is, in fact, the mechanism through which we experience the world and through which we experience relationship. So, shall I go into just explaining a little bit about projection?
Do your movie theater projector.
Well, before I give that metaphor, I think it's just worth mentioning a few things. The term projection comes up a lot in depth psychology, Jungian psychology. And in that context, it's thought to be an unconscious process by definition. Okay, which again, technically is accurate. That is true. And the point of most of what Jungian psychology is pointing towards is illustrated in a famous quote of his, which is actually a bit of a misquote, but we'll just go with it. And the quote is that we're supposed to be making the unconscious conscious. The full quote is actually, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you'll call it destiny. Okay. And so the point of depth psychology, exploring our inner being, so-called shadow work, which you told me has become a trending hashtag on some social media platform or another. Yeah. The point of all of that is to begin bringing the contents of our own unconscious being up into consciousness, i.e. awareness, shining light into the darkness. Okay. And so, with respect to projection, it isn't so much that projection stops happening, it's that we become conscious about it. And we use our consciousness of what is being projected to, in turn, explore what is happening in our own psyches. Okay. So that preface, the point of that for me is to keep people from making the mistake early on here of thinking that you will stop projecting. That's not really the point. The point is to stop unconsciously projecting, in particular, to stop unconsciously projecting your most unhealed unconscious stuff. That's the goal of this. So, okay, so what does it mean to project? So the metaphor that I've used in the past, and I'm sure did not originate with me, but I don't recall seeing it anywhere else. So until somebody comes forward, I'll just take the credit for now, is that of a movie theater projector. And you can think of your own experience in life as being the experience of the moviegoer. And in the same way that a moviegoer enters the theater, i.e. the world, and begins to have an experience, i.e. the movie, right? So in this analogy, the world, the physical world and our experience in it is analogous to a person sitting in the theater and watching a movie on the screen. And the movie is what you call your life. You're having a first person experience of some story unfolding, the story of your life. Okay. And when we don't know the mechanics of the psyche, we don't know that projection is a thing. If we get upset with something happening in the story, we go out into the story and try to fix it out there. Yeah. Which would be something like being in the movie theater and not liking the movie and going up to the screen and scratching at the screen, or trying to draw a different picture on the screen, or trying to interfere with the movie or change the story out there up on the movie screen, which we know is not how it works, right? In fact, we would say that somebody attempting to do that, for those of us who understand how a movie screen and a movie theater works, we would potentially call that person crazy if they didn't grasp that, right? So in the same way that the action on the screen is the result of the projector throwing that story from behind out onto a surface, that's true of our experience in the world. Okay. And so the movie itself, our life experience as it unfolds, actually begins in our own unconscious. It begins, it's not living, it seems to be living out there in front of us, but its origin is actually behind us on this roll of film. And that roll of film would be your personal unconscious. Okay. So as it pertains to relationship, as long as you are still living in duality, as long as you're kind of anything short of enlightened, then the reality of what you're experiencing is more akin to the movie theater analogy. And so you have your partner across from you who seems to be doing what they're doing, but your experience of that is dependent upon your own unconscious being, your own psyche. And so in the same way that it would be crazy to go up to the movie screen and try to manipulate the story from there, it's just as crazy to be having certain experiences in your life and think that you're going to change something out there without starting in here. Right. So again, in the analogy, the answer is, if you don't like what's going on, you go up into the projector room. Okay. Which again, that room would be more like your own unconscious being, and you learn what's in that room, and you explore the actual mechanics of the projector, and you look around in your own unconscious and go, oh, this is actually only one of an infinite number of films available to me, and I'm sick of this one. This is this same horror movie that I've seen over and over, and I know where it's going and I know how it ends. And I want to have a different experience. So I'm going to take this film off the roll and put a different film on, and now have a different experience. Okay. So it's not a perfect analogy, but it begins to, I think, help people have an understanding of the language first and foremost, because we're going to talk more about projection. We're going to talk about withdrawing projection. If we don't know what projection is, then talking about withdrawing projection is meaningless. And withdrawing projection is one of the most, I think, essential features in a healthy relationship, a willingness to do that from the part of both individuals involved.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. So I guess just to sort of back up again and re-emphasize, when we're talking about in relationship, withdrawing projection or quote, not projecting, again, we don't have the option, short of being fully enlightened, we don't have the option of not being a moviegoer. That's the nature of the world. It's the nature of duality, of physical existence. So the goal isn't to, quote, not project. The goal is to become conscious of what's being projected, to recognize the mechanics of projection, and to begin to take your power back, withdrawing projection. Again, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but withdrawing projection, which means going up into the projector room and doing what you can from that position to alter the life experience. That's what we're talking about when we say, quote, stop, or when somebody else says, quote, stop projecting, or the better language that we'll be using is withdrawing projection.
Yes. And then I want to offer the other metaphor. Is it a metaphor? Analogy?
It's more of an analogy than I think.
So another thing that we will often explain to people is going through life. It's like when we're born, we're given this pair of glasses, and they already have some stuff on them, some smudges, dirt, which consists of beliefs about what it is to be, a girl or a boy or a human, things that we've inherited from our parents, in our DNA even. The Hindus call that physiological karma. And then as we grow older, we kind of pile on more and more of this conditioning, this dirt onto our glasses. And so we were seeing the world through these different beliefs, fears, traumas, and conditioning that we've received over time, or that we've kind of bought into. And and of course, everyone else in the world also has their own glasses on that are dirty with various things. And part of the healing process and the awakening process is to become aware that there's something on your glasses, that you're seeing the world in a way that may not be true. Like, you first have to be open to, maybe the way I'm seeing things isn't accurate or isn't the highest reality. And then you can, through various strategies that we'll talk about later, begin to clean the lens of the glasses so that you can see the world more and more clearly and in new and different ways. So the projector, the glasses,
and
both work well.
They do. And so, the sort of common factor here in both analogies is light and the function of light. And so when we talk about light, light is a metaphor for consciousness, awareness. Okay. And so in both of these examples, and let's take the glasses example, there's the truth, which would be the raw, naked reality of the world. And through light, when you turn your consciousness to the world, there's an interplay of awareness, consciousness between the world and your eyes, right? Mm-hmm. Your perception, right? And in between there is this lens that has artifact, smudge, right? And as light is reflected off the world and comes into your eye, right? Whatever artifact is on that, or smudge is on the glasses, is going to cast a shadow onto the retina. Mm-hmm. And because of that shadow, there's now a space in your perception that has a shape and looks like a certain something, and you're gonna think that that's what you're perceiving out in the world, mm-hmm. when it's not true. Mm-hmm. To me, with your particular analogy, which I love, color has always come to mind as a really simple example. I mean, if your glasses, through, again, as you said, old trauma, inherited patterning, etc., mm-hmm. has created sort of a yellowish tinge, a dinginess to the glasses, then you're gonna look at the sky and insist that the reality of the sky is a kind of greenish quality. Mm-hmm. And you will be wrong, right? The reality of the sky is a blueness. I'm talking about your average daytime sky, of course.
Sure. Yeah, and it's agreed upon reality.
It's the shared reality, yes, mm-hmm. Collectively, and so there's the blue sky and your yellowish tinged glasses that by the time that makes its way into your perceptive processing field, the combination of yellow and blue looks like green. Right. And so we're doing that all the time in relationship. We're doing that all the time in the world. We're misperceiving all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to bring that up because it introduces the term shadow. Mm-hmm. Is this a good time to go into that?
Go for it.
Okay.
I think we want to talk about all the
Throw
terms.
it all out there. Yeah, we want to get the terms out there. So again, in your analogy, the one that you use, the shadow is the result of light meeting an obstruction, which then causes the perception to be different than the reality. Okay. And so when we're talking about, and by the way, it works just as well in the movie theater analogy. If somebody has contaminated the film strip, put a bunch of fingerprints on it, mm-hmm. well, then as that film runs through and is projected onto the screen, you're not just going to see the movie as it was intended. You're going to see the movie with all of the thumbprint smudges on it. Distortion, right. Essentially. It will be your experience will be distorted. And so the point of again, knowing the mechanics, knowing what projection is, the fact that it's happening, having these two sort of analogies to help wrap your brain around it, and knowing this term shadow is to give us a path towards exploring the contents of our own unconscious artifact, smudginess, mm-hmm. and giving us the power to do something about that, right? Yeah. And so when we talk about doing shadow work, shadow exploration, what it means is having a willingness to recognize where your perception has been distorted, and how do you do that? How do you know what's influencing you? How do you know what the nature of the smudge, wound, trauma, misperception is? You do, quote, shadow work. You map out the shadow, right? And so in the movie theater analogy, if if every other scene has the same fingerprint smudge, then the shadow work is to not only just pay attention to the story as you sort of have reflexively done your whole life, but to sort of pull your vision, your awareness back, open it up a bit, and go, okay, wait a minute. There was an action scene, and then there was a love scene, and then there was a sad part, and then there was a happy part. Except in all of those scenes, there's this other thing. There's this smudge that I didn't even notice before. I didn't even notice was a smudge. I just thought it was part of the movie.
Right.
But now that I've sort of pulled back and had an intention to look deeper, I recognize that no matter what story seems to be playing, no matter what piece of the story seems to be there, there's this other thing that's just sort of inevitably there with it. Maybe that's not part of the movie. Maybe that's an artifact. Maybe that's a smudge. Maybe there's something I can do about that. Right. And so in the analogy, it would be easy. You would go into the projector room and you would look at the negative, right? And you would go, oh yeah, and you would clean it off and put it back on, and then go, great. That would be what withdrawing the projection is like, and doing your shadow work. So, what might that look like in relationship?
Are you asking me literally, or?
I am literally asking you. Here I am in the flesh, literally asking you.
I mean, I can tell you what it looked like for me.
Great.
Doing my shadow work looked like anytime I felt a sense of conflict or unease in the relationship, I would examine my thoughts and try to understand from those thoughts, how was I seeing you? What kind of role was I placing you in? What kind of expectations did I have of you that maybe I wasn't communicating clearly? So I had to go into my thoughts, and also my emotional body. Excuse me. I needed to explore, okay, when this experience happens, I feel some kind of sensation in my body, which is, part of my shadow, because I don't have a name for it yet. And then I think about, okay, what is this sensation? Is this anxiety? Is this fear? Is this guilt? Is this shame? And then you begin to just perceive the shadow. You start to like I think you talked about the elephant analogy, where there's three people in a room and they're feeling the elephant from different perspectives. Well, literally doing that within myself. So, you and I have a disagreement, let's say about the kids. You have a reaction or a response. I have a reaction as well. And so I'm going to sit with my reaction and begin to feel around the room. What was my emotional response to this? What was my mental response to this? How did I want to react? Maybe I wanted to scream and yell. What does that mean? Why did I want to scream and yell? We start to think about these things. That's making it conscious.
Yeah, and exploring, I think, the feeling quality of it, and being willing to, again, take that kind of step back and say, okay, that feeling seems to be showing up really powerfully here, and I want to assign its origin to my partner,
Mhm.
But if I'm honest, if I expand my perceptive field,
Mhm.
and track what I'm perceiving over all of the different scenes of the movie of my life, I
Mhm.
recognize that, oh no, that particular flavor of feeling, tone, or energy has actually been pervasive throughout my life.
Mhm.
So it can't be originating in my partner. It can't be my partner's fault,
Right.
as much as I would like it to be.
Sure.
Right. Um, so that's an example of exploring the shadow.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm going to kind of come back to talking about the mechanics of this for a little bit, because I think there's another piece of the movie theater analogy in particular
Mhm.
that works really well. Our shadow we could describe as that negative aspect of our being.
Mhm.
It's the things that we have. So again, when psychologists talk about the shadow, so, well, what makes up the shadow, psychologically speaking? It's the things that have been too difficult for us to process or handle in the moment, things that have been too painful to be with, aspects of self that have been rejected, that we refuse to acknowledge, that have a flavor of shame about them,
Mhm.
fear. So anything that we perceive to be negative becomes the shadow. Okay. And so use that word negative and think about it now in the context of the movie theater analogy. Well, what is the source of everything that gets thrown out onto the movie screen? If you actually open up that roll of film and look at it, you're looking at a negative,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's how movie projection works. So when you look at the film itself, you're not seeing, you can't look at that and see the movie as it's intended to be seen. When you look at that, you're seeing the movie inverted. You're seeing a film negative. And it's because it is a film negative that by the time light is shown through it and it's cast up onto the screen, it becomes the movie as we experience it. Okay.
Mhm.
So thinking about negative in that light, instead of being judgmental about it, the things in our shadow are the things that have become this film negative in our own psyche. And by its very nature, all of that material will be cast out into our life experience. Okay. So um so the point of doing shadow work isn't to come into conflict with these aspects of our being and our old trauma and hidden rejected parts of ourselves. It isn't to be in conflict. It is to integrate them.
Mm.
It's to come to terms with them, to consciously work with them in a loving fashion,
Mhm.
understanding this is just how the nature works. This is just how the human psyche works. And this isn't about finding some mass within yourself to sort of carve out like a tumor and throw away and be rid of. That is in fact how shadow is created. That would be just another act of rejection, creating more
Mhm.
negativity
Yeah.
and causing more shadow to be projected
Increasing
out
the
into the
pain.
world,
Yeah.
increasing the pain and increasing the experience of suffering in the world. So when we're talking about withdrawing projection and doing shadow work, it can be painful. It can be difficult. There's no doubt about it. It takes a lot of, I think, fortitude, humility, to be willing and able to do this kind of work.
Mm.
But when we start doing that, we're not going in there to root out ugly, nasty parts of ourselves and carve them out and reject them. That's how those things got there in the first place.
Yeah.
We are coming to terms with them. We are shining light on them. We are working with those things through somatic practices, active imagination, journaling, all sorts
Therapy.
of therapy. Yeah.
EMDR, CRT.
Yep. All sorts of ways of working with them in a conscious and loving fashion, and integrating those things into our being in such a way that they cease to be negative. And when they're no longer negative, that means they're no longer a part of this film strip, and will no longer be, cast out into the life experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you speak about it being brave and challenging to do the shadow work. I think part of that is because we have been told that it's hard and painful to do shadow work. I think my experience was that it was hard and painful, but I had only been told that it was hard and painful.
Yeah, I hear you. Maybe other people have different experiences, but
well, I don't know of any. I'm just saying it's collectively understood that it's hard and painful. But part of the reason that we're doing this podcast is to help, we don't want to use the word normalize because that's kind of a strange math word, but to make okay this process of understanding what's in our unconscious, what we're not aware of, what kind of conditioning we've taken on. Conditioning happens. It's just part of being informed. And if we have an attitude of, oh, let's see what's there, what ways have I been conditioned, it's a possibility for the future for people. I remember moving into that phase where I was less about, oh my God, I'm broken. There's so much wrong with me. Look how I'm projecting everything on the world. God, how did I get so messed up? Into, I wonder what this is about. I wonder, what am I seeing here? Like, what is the misunderstanding that I'm having?
Yeah.
And it became a positive and affirming process to go through the shadow work. Nothing that I feared. I no longer feared it.
Yeah. I'm in full agreement. I think that is an excellent point to make. That the experience of the net experience of doing shadow work is far less difficult and less painful than continuing to live life unconsciously. It's at the beginning for many people, there's an initial difficulty or suffering that is different than what you're used to. And so you're not acclimated to that kind of suffering. It's, I think probably the best word is humility. And so the more anchored we are in ego, which is by its nature hubristic, the more anchored we are in that, the more the act of looking into the shadow will be an experience of suffering initially, because there's more of this, the egomaniacal structures in place. And again, that's just the nature of the ego. It's not the ego doing something naughty.
Well, I want to say something about the humility part, because people don't understand that word either.
Okay, let's explain.
There's a shadow humility that people, that which means I'm a broken, messed up human.
Yeah.
And therefore, I project.
Yeah.
Like, that's not humility.
Yeah.
Humility means I don't know what's going on. I have a fresh, I want to see things fresh. having the desire to be in the newness. I can't remember what tradition, maybe Zen, calls it beginner mind, having a beginner mind.
Sounds
Not I'm an expert on everything. People who say that they're experts on things, super, that's great. But if you're very rigidly, egotistically, attached to being an expert in something, you've made yourself a little box of limits.
Well, especially if being an expert on yourself is anathema to shadow work. Like that just doesn't work. They don't go together.
Free state, yeah.
Right. Like if you're convinced you're an expert on yourself and you know yourself, then you aren't going to make any progress with shadow work. And so that's where that's where the real humility comes in. The humility to say something is going on here that's different than what I've always thought. And I'm willing to know the truth about it, no matter how bitter a pill that is to swallow.
Right.
Maybe that's a better word that we'll throw out now and I'll kind of keep in mind for future conversations. Maybe it's not so much that shadow work is difficult, it's just that it's bitter. It can be at the I think it is. I know where your mind, you'd like to go to the end or sort of deep into the process where shadow work is just immensely rewarding. It's the experience of coming to know yourself and falling in love with yourself. It is that. But, I think for anybody that's new to this, I don't know, maybe it's just my own personality quirk. I sort of like to prepare people, there's some bitter medicine that comes when you dive into shadow work.
Well, my argument is, what are we preparing people for? We create a reality when we do that. You will experience pain. This is more theoretical.
It is more theoretical.
We've all been taught that shadow work and therapy is painful. It was for me at first. There was a shift. I don't know. Maybe moving forward, it doesn't have to be so difficult. I don't know. Maybe we can change. I'm not saying sugarcoat it or tell people it's fun. I'm just saying it doesn't always have to be bitter. It can have all the flavors. It's new. It's a new thing at first. At first, it might be strange.
Yep.
But I think part of the norm, how I say normalizing doing things is to take stigma out of it, take preconceived notions out of this work. Yeah,
I mean, I get it. And it's a little bit of a tangent here. You and I are, we're having a philosophical discussion that we have different, which is fine. I mean, that's fine for people to be able to sort of see that and play itself out.
Right.
But for me, the reality of withdrawing projection, doing our shadow work, et cetera, as having a difficulty or a bitterness to it, to me, isn't really a stigma. But I do hear what you're saying, that there's a very fine line there.
Nobody will do it. That's why people are afraid. That's part of the reason why people are afraid.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's true.
Around therapy.
Yeah. Well, everybody who's involved in this and who dives into this with us, you'll be able to provide us some feedback about what your experience is. And, yeah. Okay. So where are we here? Again, the overarching theme is one of projection. We've talked about the mechanics of projection. We've given a couple of analogies.
Yep.
We've talked about what it is that we're projecting. And again, for the context of exploring conscious relationship, learning to be in conscious relationship with your partner, yourself, others in the world, we want to know what it is that we're projecting. And what we're projecting predominantly is our unconscious shadow. And so then the quest, the exploration becomes, okay, well, if I continue to experience my shadow out in the world, and I don't want to do that anymore. How do I do something about that? I have to turn around and look and explore and outline the shape of that shadow within me, so that whenever it shows up in the world, I can go, aha, there it is. I almost fell for it again. I almost thought, oops, that's a part of the world. I was almost convinced again, but now I know the outline of my shadow material. And so when it shows up in the world, I can now sort of disentangle it from the actual raw experience of the world. I can sort of take that shadow or that projected shadow and withdraw the projection and say, okay, let me bring this back into where it belongs. Instead of rejecting it, let me own it. And once I've owned that, now I look out here, what do I see? Right. And you're going to see something new.
Yeah.
Something different. Regardless of how convincing that projected shadow can be, convincing you that no, it is really your partner who's the problem. Yeah. I always feel like this is where we do the caveat, right? You may withdraw the projection. You may recognize your shadow, withdraw it, do some work around it, look back out here and still go, yeah, I don't like that at all.
Yeah,
I'm over this story. This doesn't work for me. It violates my boundaries. It doesn't honor who I am as a person. It's not how I want to be in relationship. And so I'm moving on.
Which is still a part of withdrawing the projection. You're still disentangling yourself from how that is showing up in the world.
Yes, often, or to come back to the analogies, that is the, you go to clean the smudge off of the glasses to create the new experience. And you realize that, no, this experience that I'm in, the whole thing is the smudge, right? This person I'm in relationship with, the fact that I was willing to be in relationship with somebody who treats me this way is in fact the smudge. And cleaning this smudge means getting out of this relationship.
Yeah, walking away from it.
Yeah. So that is a possibility. I think, which comes to maybe the next important point, which is that we never know if that's true or not until we begin the process of withdrawing projection and exploring our shadow. Until we disentangle our projection and our shadow material from the world, we can't tell which is which. And we never will be able to until we've turned within and done this exploration.
Should we talk about archetypes and roles?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Well, one of the ways, all right, so people in our lives, they play different roles in the movie of our lives. We've got a mother, a father, siblings, aunts, uncles, friends, co-workers, partners, etc. And we will have a list of expectations, sometimes conscious, sometimes not conscious, of what these people are going to, how they're going to interact with us, how they will be in our play. So we have, set ideas of what a mother is supposed to be like. Much of that comes from our conditioning. When we're growing up, we see our mother and we think this is a mother. This is what mothers are like. We might get different information from movies. We might see, some movie on television and there's an incredible mother who models like this archetypal mother. And we might start to look at our mother in that movie mother and notice the differences and create more beliefs and conclusions about who a mother is. And then, of course, we see other people mothering and we see ourselves mothering, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, all kinds of characteristics that make up the character of mother. Same for father, same for partner, same, there's many archetypes, including ones that are more collective archetypes like king or queen or healer or wizard or warrior. So in relationships, one of the difficulties is, well, this is maybe a long conversation to have some other time. We can extend it out. But if we have not developed and gotten to know these archetypes within our own being, we are always going to be casting that out into the world and looking for those archetypes.
Yes.
So when we're growing up, the job of a child is to grow up, be taken care of by the parents, going off and leaving the home and learning how to mother and father oneself, developing an inner mother and an inner father. You know, the mother that makes sure that you are well taken care of in various ways, and the father well taken care of in various ways. However, if you don't develop an inner mother and an inner father fully, you will begin to look for that in partners. And for me, that looked like I chose a husband who was very much like my mother. I had not individuated from my mother, had not developed my own inner mother, and thus unconsciously, I saw my husband when I started dating him, and I thought, this guy is great. He's kind, he's loving, he does all kinds of like acts of service for me. He's very sweet. When I'm sick, he takes care of me. All of these things that are similar to my mother. And then I sort of outsourced that mothering. I projected mother onto him. Other things too, but mother is just the one I'm using now. And received those mothering roles, those mothering activities, like through him instead of through myself. Mm-hmm. And when he didn't meet the role of mother for some reason, like, he was working that day or whatever, there was a feeling of abandonment and loneliness and feeling overwhelmed. That was a really predominant feeling that I had with my own kids. When he would go off to work, he worked 24-hour shifts. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I guess I'm in charge here. Like, it's just me. And I was, of course, 100% capable and a good mother on my own. But I was still caught in the idea that my mother had left because I was projecting that on him. He had gone to work and I was like an orphan for the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's an example of projecting a role onto somebody that doesn't feel good to the other person usually. Sometimes it can feel good. Depends on the person's attachment to the role.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example, and probably a great place to center the conversation, because as it pertains to becoming conscious in relationship, and hypothetically right now we're talking about romantic partners, mm-hmm. right?
Yep.
Predominantly. It also applies, but let's just take romantic partners because that will be most people who are involved in, even if you're not actively in a relationship, right. You've probably been in one.
Yep.
Because this is certainly one of the most common dynamics that unfolds in unconscious relationship. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit different than the example you're giving, but predominantly what you see is you have the man or the masculine identifying individual in the relationship projecting shadow mother stuff onto the female or more feminine partner.
Right.
And you have the female or more feminine individual in the relationship projecting their unconscious shadow father archetype, father complex stuff onto the more masculine or male partner. Mm-hmm. And so I'll use me as an example for this particular situation because it's pretty spot on. How do I summarize a decade of shadow work? So suffice it to say that in my willingness to take on the humility to do my shadow exploration and begin exploring the contents of my own unconscious, what I kept seeing showing up throughout the experience of my personal movie was smudges and distortions that all had the shape of mother complex stuff. It's not just that. We don't just have one complex, but
right.
It would be an exceptionally rare individual born into this world, living a human experience, who does not have a complex of the opposite gender parent. Be exceptionally rare. Remind me to come back to that, because today's an interesting day to be talking about this. Okay. So, so I became aware of that. It's not that there weren't other complexes showing up that needed work with, but at some point in my exploration, it became clear through dream analysis, paying attention, all the forms of work I was doing, that, oh, this mother complex thing keeps showing up. Okay. Yeah. So I had traced out the shape of my shadow. And part of the humility of doing this work is recognizing that once you have identified the shadow, and to bring this back to where you've taken us, often the shadow will have the shape of an archetype. Okay. And that's why it's nice to know the archetypes. Yeah. And so I traced out my shadow and went, it's the archetype of the devouring mother. That is a negative mother complex that had become a part of the shadow that kept just being projected out into the world over and over. Once I had identified that within myself, sort of named that complex, the humility is then to go, okay, anywhere there is a convenient screen that is capable of holding this image as I project it into the world, I would be well off to just assume that that's what's happening. Not all the time, but there's clues to when our unconscious projection is really in full force, and it's usually strain and emotionality. It's sort of like we talked about with the ego conversation in a previous chat. And if you're in relationship and something has really triggered you, and you're seeing something in your partner that is just going to drive you nuts, or is really inflaming or irritating, and you're sure that you're seeing what that is, and on and on. Part of the humility and difficulty is that in the midst of that emotionality, that intensity, and the ego saying, I'm right and I know exactly what's going on here, comes the act of withdrawing the projection, where you take sort of within yourself an energetic, like, oh, time out. I'm all riled up. Yeah. What do I know about this? I know that when I'm riled up, i.e. triggered into unconsciousness, and the unconscious is coming up more powerfully than usual and really being beamed out into the world, I know, this is me personally now in my case, that takes the shape often of devouring mother complex. And I sort of know what that means. It's beyond the scope of this chat. And so that was how I practiced my withdrawing of projection and did my shadow work in relationship with you, is that when something like that would happen, and there would be intensity and energy and a firmness and certainty of my point of view being the correct one and you being completely wrong, I just stopped and went, okay, I know by definition right now, I have to be projecting this complex onto my partner. Right. And so I also then therefore know that what I'm seeing, what I'm perceiving, cannot be the truth. It is the truth with then layers of contamination and smudge and distortion laid over it. And that's what I'm reactive to. And so it's just knowing that, and energetically, for me, it was recognizing, okay, here it is. And, in our relationship, it's been rare that sort of thing has happened, but it has often been, as someone without kids, myself personally, and now I have a relationship with your kids, and we have this dynamic that takes place when they come and spend a summer with us. It's just all kinds of opportunity for stuff to come up and be seen. And so, of course, it was a wonderful opportunity, as I observed you being a mother, for any unconscious mother complex stuff within me to be brought to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just knowing that's what's happening. And the only way to know that, or that I could have known that, is because I had previously been willing to look in and map out and explore my own past, my own history, my own traumas, looking at clues in other relationships, looking at clues from dream analysis, that I was able to go, aha, mother complex is a big part of what is active in my own unconscious. And so now I can look for it. It's going to show up. I just have to be willing to admit that that's what's happening, often when I least wanted to.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to my previous assertion. I think that's the difficulty.
Admitting that it's happening.
I think the difficulty is that when these things show up and are sort of most ripe for the identification, and when we have the most potent opportunity to withdraw projection and do a deep piece of inner healing work, that will most often be when we least want to do that. That will be when the ego is most assertive of itself.
Okay. Yeah, I've had that experience.
Yeah,
I understand.
Or maybe it's just me.
No, I know. I mean, there have been times. It's not happened so much in the relationship with you, but it used to happen in therapy with your mom a lot. His mom was my therapist. When she would point something out to me, and I'd want to draw a line of fire between myself and whatever she was saying.
Yeah, there you go. Oh.
Because it was just felt like it was cutting too deep into the sense of self that I had built, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then I had to, maybe I kept that fire blazing for a day or two. But then I would let it go out and just kind of sit with that and see if I could see a truth in it. For me, one of my, this is pertinent to the conversation, I think, but one of the things that I've had to grow, cultivate within myself is, if someone points something out to me, maybe you're projecting mother or something onto me, I have to say, maybe you're right. I'll sit with that and see and check. do my own checks to see if it's true, if it's true for me, if it feels right. Yeah,
it's a two-way street, and this is a huge piece of being in a high functioning, healthy, conscious relationship is both people doing this simultaneously, being willing to do this. It's not like it's perfect. It's not like we don't ever, fall short of the hypothetical mark of perfect self-awareness. But there's a foundational shared understanding and willingness to be engaged in these processes within ourselves. And so to come back around to these archetypes, the easiest ones to start working with are mother and father. And just that's part of the humility of this work. If you have not done a tremendous amount of exploration and healing or with your childhood and your parents, in particular the opposite gender parent, in particular the opposite gender parent for the majority of people who are heterosexual.
Right.
There's different mechanics of how this might work in same gender relationships, and I'm neither homosexual nor an expert in the psychology of that, so I don't talk about it for that reason, not because I'm ignoring it.
Yeah,
it's
it
not my
has a part.
expertise or my
It shows
experience.
up. It shows up, but
it's
it may show
definitely
up in different ways.
right. So when I make these generalizations, I just know that I am aware that I'm generalizing, and it's not with the intention of kind of marginalizing or excluding a pretty large subset of human life experience.
Right.
It's just about giving people a working construct, and then you'll have to adapt that to your specific circumstance. So yes, so again, speaking generally, if you haven't done a lot of that really deep exploration and healing work around your parents, particularly the opposite gender parent, part of the humility piece of doing this work is to just know you are absolutely projecting unconscious shadow mother or father complex stuff onto your partner. There's just no way that's not happening. It might have different flavors for different people in different relationships, but if you just assume it's happening, it's a pretty safe bet. And so, go ahead.
Well, I agree with you, but I think my example is a good one to show how it can be different. So in my family of origin, I identified more with my father, even though I was a woman. My personality, I felt like my personality was more like him. Quiet, reserved, passive, just not very opinionated, outwardly opinionated, generally just congenial and not emotional, not particularly emotional. And so because of that, I'd sense of identification with the opposite gender. When I went to go project and meet a partner, I matched with someone who carried more of the qualities of my mother. That was almost the bigger perceived wound that I needed to heal, was my lack of identification with the feminine.
Sure. Yeah.
I was not very identified with the feminine. So, however, when I released that relationship and moved out of that dynamic with my ex-husband and withdrew that projection and could kind of see it all, when I moved into the relationship with you, I began to project masculine archetypes onto you. So it changed as I was doing my healing.
Yep.
I wasn't so much father with you. It was more, will you please be my warrior, rescuer, prince? So maybe that's not, I mean, that might not be common, but and typically I do see, mostly when I work with men, I see they have whatever unhealed stuff they have about mother is almost always projected onto their chosen heterosexual partner. And women are almost always projecting. It's weird because maybe this is true for both, and maybe you can say more about this, but they'll choose a partner that's similar to their parent or completely different. So it's kind of like a reverse projection.
Well, yeah. So again, we'll go down a little bit of a rabbit hole of psychology here. So bear with us.
Worth doing it, I think.
Both of those are manifestations of the opposite gender parent complex.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, with men who had an overbearing mother, okay, will do typically one of two things that look like opposites. They will either go marry a woman who is exactly like their mother and have an overbearing, nagging wife, or they will become promiscuous and completely non-attached to women. Both of those are manifestations of a mother complex. They're two different ways of the psyche responding to the same stimulus. But so even though those two men might look opposite, you have one man who kind of, met somebody at a very young age and they've been married for decades, and he's kind of miserable and held prisoner by an overbearing woman.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole story is a cliche, right? I mean, and by the way, cliches start as archetypes. That's why they're cliches, because they're archetypal. So you have that man who's just been with the one woman and has been sort of like kind of held captive by her his whole life. And you have another man who refuses to be pinned down, the quintessential sort of playboy. They will seem to be, if you look at them, on totally opposite ends of the spectrum, completely fundamentally different. Both of their behaviors is originating from the same wound. Right.
Yeah. Or the men who choose a woman who's just soft and passive and.
That's right. It's not a binary choice. I shouldn't give that impression. Yeah, there's other ways of managing it.
Like, I don't want anyone like my mother, so let me choose someone who's completely non-overbearing.
Yes.
And maybe he then gets to act out his complex directly, being the overbearing one.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe not.
Yeah. And so again, we're just giving examples, and some of this might resonate as you, not Jamie, you, as you, the viewer, are watching and listening to this. See where some of this may resonate. So those are, a couple common examples. If it doesn't perfectly resonate, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not acting out and experiencing projected mother or father complex on your partner. Right. Your task becomes to sort of figure out how that's happening. Again, trace the outline of your shadow so that you know when it shows up. The difficulty in shadow work, that I'm with you, it doesn't have to be difficult. We can just go with it.
The difficulty
is that, again, the best opportunity for you to become aware of the shape and nature of your shadow complex, shadow material, is when you're having difficulty with your partner. Right? In those times of stress, tension, either in acute instances of it, like a particular argument, or if there's a thread of tension that continues to be problematic and run through relationship, you can look at that thread and pull on it and hold it up to the light and find out clues about the nature of your particular complex. So, and so again, as far as it pertains to just talking about projection, this is one small piece that we're covering today. What matters now is just that you see that that's happening and become willing to sort of energetically take that back into yourself and recognize that what you're experiencing is the nature of your own wound. And stop making it so much about your partner, and stop trying to resolve your wound by fixing your partner or insisting your partner be different.
Right.
Maybe that needs to happen. That comes much later. You won't know. You won't know if your partner is actually okay for you as he or she is until you've withdrawn the projection and taken this energy back into yourself and worked with it. And we've already mentioned, but say it again, that dream analysis, CRT, cellular release therapy, talk therapy, different somatic therapeutic approaches. There's EMDR. There's millions of ways to go about this.
Work with it, right.
And of course, feel free to reach out to us if you need specific recommendations. But it's going to look like therapy, some form of therapeutic intervention, most often with the assistance of a professional.
Yeah, I think one of the clues you might have, if you find yourself saying, oh, this person's just like my mother, or this person's just like my father.
Yeah, that's way more than a clue. That's the whole that's the whole answer. That's X marks the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this, the most common projection, mother, father, onto your partner. Sit down and make a list of everything that you see in your mother or see in your father. Qualities, overbearing, possessive, emotional, rigid, nervous, like whatever. Do it for both. Even if you're a woman, do it for your mother and your father, because you might be projecting, you might be an outlier and project mother onto your partner. And then begin to see, which my partner that I'm with right now, what things do they have in common? What do I see or think that they have in common with my parents? And you kind of make check marks next to each one of those things. And then if you really want to have a good time, think about previous partners and make a list of their qualities and see how much overlap there is. And you'll probably see a pattern. Like, oh, I tend to choose people who feel a sense of shame about themselves. And that's something that comes from the dynamic with my father or whatever. And you begin to look at that and kind of piece it out and begin to pull back on these perceptions and see if you can see the person that you're with just as they are, because everyone's a unique individual. No one is just like our parents. That doesn't exist. We only have that distortion in our mind.
Yeah, and not just observing the qualities that were present, but also observing what you felt was lacking or what you didn't receive from a parent.
Oh yes, good thinking. Like a lack of conflict, a lack of the ability to work through conflict. That was something that was definitely true in my growing up years. We all tiptoed around each other.
Yep. And
so that lack, I took that into every dynamic that I had. And when you showed up, very direct, I was like, what the hell, dude? Like, you're not playing by the script. No, you don't set a boundary. I was really okay with it. But in the moment, I was like, what? Oh, this is a totally different situation.
Right.
I need to withdraw my projection. Hagen's trying to come in. I need to take back this idea that he's just like my parents, or this is a continuation of my family dynamic, and recognize that that's my stuff that I'm putting in to the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there's really common, very, very easily identified examples of this. If you had a parent who left when you were a child,
in some way, physically or just emotionally, or was never present, emotionally,
and you have experiences, you continue to have experiences of abandonment, perceived abandonment in relationships, or maybe literal abandonment. Like maybe your partner has literally ghosted you. That's an example of these unconscious shadow archetypes, complexes playing themselves out. And the mistake is to say, I've just I keep choosing the wrong partner. And the problem is the partner. The problem is there aren't enough good men, or there aren't enough of loving women in the world. That's not true.
Right.
Again, that's being willing to withdraw that projection, to sort of pull your vision back from being lost in the movie and take the more panoramic perspective, and recognize that there's the same flavor of distortion that keeps showing up in your experience over and over. That means it's originating from within.
Mm-hmm. It's not you don't blame yourself in that moment, though.
Yes, thank you.
I think that's that's what people do when
Yeah.
they enter therapy, and they see, oh, I'm always with emotionally unavailable partners.
Yep.
It's me. I am emotionally unavailable.
Right.
Maybe that's true, but also that could be you're always looking for your father who is emotionally unavailable in your partner.
Right. Again, even if it is true, that doesn't make it not a wound. It's an injury that needs healing, not something. Right,
not something to lash
blaming.
yourself over.
Right.
Wound yourself more over.
Yeah.
Did we miss anything in our list?
No, I think
Did we?
we've hit that all.
No, you wanted to talk about comparing the ego to projection. Now, do you remember what that was going to be? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that was just about coming all the way back to the beginning of projection as a natural or normal or inevitable thing that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually, it's a good segue. That means that blame is not appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
It's analogous to the ego in that you will you hear the ego being sort of vilified constantly. Again, especially in sort of modern pop spiritual sort of meme culture. Talk of the ego, being annihilated, or taking psychedelics to bring about ego death. If the ego dies, you are no longer in existence in this plane.
Mm-hmm.
So the ego, and there's a good
Don't try
argument
to kill
actually
it.
that there's a good argument that there's actually no such thing on any plane. It's not about ego death. It's not about annihilation of the ego.
Mm-hmm.
That the ego, in fact, is an integral part of the basic mechanical operation of life on Earth, just like projection is. And so with the ego and projection here, it's about becoming more conscious and no longer identifying yourself with your ego, and no longer identifying yourself with your shadow projections, finding a center of self behind that, being in the projector room where you are still present with the ego and still watching the movie that's being projected, but you're in a place of power and authority with respect to the ego or projection. So we're not annihilating these things, ego and projection. We're becoming more conscious of them and working with them consciously.
Yeah, our relationship to them changes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, okay. Well, we can barely see you now because it is 4:40 sunset here in
Better? Is that better?
December. Slightly better, yes. But maybe that wraps things up.
Yeah, I think that's a great beginning to this conversation.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, if you've made it this far, and we'll see you for the next one.
Yes.